the geography of evolution. Good day everyone! Today, we will be presenting the geography of evolution. We'll explore how the distribution of species across the earth provides powerful evidence for evolutionary processes and how historical and ecological factors shape biodiversity patterns globally. Biogeography is the study of the geographic distribution of living organisms. It's not only about where species are found, but also why they are found there. And this distribution tells us a lot about how species evolve. Throughout this presentation, we'll explore 5 main areas. First, the biogeographic evidence of evolution. Second, the major patterns of distribution. Third, historical explanations for these distributions. Fourth, geographic range, limits due to ecological and evolutionary factors. And fifth, geographic patterns of diversity. Biogeographic evidence for evolution. One of the most compelling lines of evidence for evolution comes from the field of biogeography, the study of how species are distributed across the planet and how those patterns have changed over time. When we examine where species live today and compare that to their evolutionary histories, we find strong evidence that supports the theory of evolution and help us understand how life diversified over millions of years. The first one is endemism as evidence of evolution. Let's start with endemism, which refers to the species that are found in only one specific geographic location and nowhere else on Earth. A well-known example is the lemurs of Madagascar. Madagascar is separated from mainland Africa over 100 million years ago. The lemurs that inhabit this island today are found nowhere else in the world. This suggests that they evolved in isolation after their ancestors arrived, supporting the idea of evolution through geographic isolation. Similarly, the marsupials of Australia, like kangaroos and koalas, are almost entirely restricted to that continent. Australia's long geographic isolation allowed marsupials to diversify independently from placental mammals found elsewhere, showing how evolution proceeds differently in different regions when populations are separated. Next is adaptive variation in islands. Islands in particular provide excellent natural laboratories for studying evolution. One of the most famous examples comes from the Galapagos Islands, where Charles Darwin observed a group of birds now known as Darwin's finches. These birds are closely related but have evolved different beak shapes and sizes depending on the food sources available on each island. This is a textbook case of adaptive variation where one ancestral species gives rise to many new species as it adapts to different ecological niches. The diversity of these finches across such a small geographic area offers powerful evidence that new species can evolve through natural selection in response to environmental pressures. Next is fossil evidence and continental drift. Biogeographical evidence isn't limited to living species. Fossil records also support evolution by revealing past distributions of species that help reconstruct evolutionary histories. A classic example is the extinct freshwater reptile Mesosaurus, whose fossils have been found in both South America and Southern Africa. These continents are now separated by the Atlantic Ocean, but the presence of identical fossils on both sides suggests that these land masses were once connected part of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana. This supports the theory of continental drift and helps explain how related organisms could have originally evolved together before being separated by plate tectonics. It also shows that the distribution of species is not random. It follows the movement of continents over time. Next is convergent evolution and similar environments. Another form of biogeographic evidence is found in convergent evolution, where unrelated species evolve similar traits because they live in similar environments. For example, the Tasmanian tiger in Australia, a marsupial, and the gray wolf in North America, a placental mammal, have similarly body shape, skulls, and hunting behaviors. However, they are not closely related genetically. Instead, they independently evolved similar species to adapt to similar predatory roles. This shows that natural selection can lead to similar adaptations in different parts of the world, even when the species are not related, reinforcing the power of evolutionary processes driven by environmental factors. Biogeographic realms and species relatedness. Lastly, when we divide the world into biogeographic realms such as Neotropical, Afrotropical, or Australasian regions, we find that species within a realm tend to be more closely related to each other than to those in other regions, even if those regions have similar climates. For instance, tropical rainforests in Amazon and in Southeast Asia may look similar and share similar conditions, but the species living there are very different. Jaguars and monkeys in South America are unrelated to the tigers and gibbons in Southeast Asia. This suggests that evolutionary history, not just environment, shapes species distribution, a clear sign that life on Earth has diversified through both time and space.
Let's talk about the major patterns of distribution. So for population distribution patterns, there are three patterns that are evident. So first one is uniform, wherein species are spread out evenly across an area. Next is clumped, wherein individuals of a species are grouped together in patches or clusters. And lastly is random, which are individuals that are spread randomly without any clear pattern. So you can see in the pictures in there on how they are distributed. For major geographic patterns, there are three, which are cosmopolitan distribution, endemic distribution, and disjunct distribution. So for cosmopolitan distribution, this is wherein a species is found almost everywhere around the world. For endemic distribution, this is a species is found only in a specific place and nowhere else. And for disjunct distribution naman, wherein a species exists in two or more separate areas with large gaps in between. For cosmopolitan, so these are the examples of species having cosmopolitan distribution. So first is the killer whales, or the orca, commonly known as orca, and the rock dove, or Columba livia. For endemic species, here in the Philippines, we have the Tamarao bull, or the Bobalus mindorensis. This species is endemic to the island of the Mindoro in the Philippines and is only endemic Philippine bovine. For disjunct distribution, an example of this is the mole species of North America and the species of turtles. So how does disjunct distribution happen? So it can only happen either dispersal or vicariance. So what is the difference among the two? So when you say dispersal, this is when a population moves to a new location. For vicariance, environmental changes break up a once continuous population into small pockets. So biogeographical realms. So there are a total of 8 biogeographical realms considered currently. So first we have the Nearctic, or the North America, Neotropical, the South and Central America, the Palearctic, which are the Europe, North Africa, and Northern Asia, Afrotropical, Africa south of the Sahara, Indo-Malayan, which is South Asia, Australasian, which are the countries Australia and New Guinea, Oceanian, which are the Pacific islands, and the Antarctic, which is the Antarctica. So for visualization, this is the map containing all of the biogeographical realms.
Good day everyone! Today I will be discussing a fascinating topic that bridges history, geography, and biology, the historical explanations of geographic distributions. Now let us define first what is geographic distribution. Geographic distribution refers to the natural arrangement and spread of different species, populations, or ecosystems across various parts of the world. In simple terms, it answers the question where the organisms live and why are they found there. Some organisms are found almost everywhere, like rats, humans, or dandelions, while others are very limited to range. For example, the koala is native only to certain forests in Australia, and the giant panda is only found in a few mountain ranges in China. The distribution of species is shaped by many factors such as climate, geographic barriers like oceans, mountains, and deserts, available resources like food and shelter, and biological interactions such as competition, predation, and symbiosis. And very importantly, historical events such as the movement of continents, glaciation, and extinction events. Now let's talk about how living things, plants, animals, and even tiny microbes are spread across the world. This is called species distribution, and it's like figuring out why certain animals live in certain places and not others.
First, we have the climate. Species need the right temperature, rainfall, and humidity to survive, just like people need the right clothes for the weather. Example, polar bears live in the cold Arctic, not in the desert, because they need ice and cold to survive. Next, we have the geographic barriers. These are natural walls like mountains, oceans, and deserts that stop species from moving up to other places. Example, kangaroos are only found in Australia because the ocean keeps them from spreading to other continents. Next is the biological interactions. Species affect each other. They may compete for the same food, help each other, or even hunt each other. Example, lions and hyenas compete for food in the African savanna. Another example is bees and flowers help each other. Bees get nectar and flowers get pollinated. The last one is the historical events, things that happened long ago, like continents moving, ice ages, or dinosaurs going extinct, still affect where species are found today. Example, South America used to be connected to Africa, so some animals and plants there are related. Another example is, when an ice age happened, animals moved south to warmer places. Some never went back. Next is the key historical factors influencing distribution. First, we have the continental drift and plate tectonics. One of the most influential theories in historical biogeography is plate tectonics. Around 250 million years ago, all continents were joined into a supercontinent called Pangaea. As Pangaea broke apart, species became isolated on different land masses, leading to divergent evolution. For instance, marsupials evolved in isolation in Australia, explaining their uniqueness. Fossil evidence of the same plant species, Glossopteris, has been found in South America, Africa, Antarctica, and India, suggesting these continents were once connected. Next is we have the glacial and interglacial periods. During the Pleistocene ice ages, large parts of North America, Europe, and Asia were covered by glaciers. Species either migrated south, adapted to cold, or went extinct. When the glaciers receded, organisms colonized available land. These glacial cycles caused repeated shifts in species, ranges, and influenced the genetic diversity we observe today. The third one is the dispersal events and land bridges. Some species spread by dispersing across land bridges, like the Bering Land Bridge that once connected Asia and North America. This allowed the migration of animals like mammoths, bison, and early humans. Dispersal also occurs through floating vegetation, wind, ocean currents, or bird-mediated transport, especially for island species. Next, we have the evolution and speciation. Geographic isolation often leads to the formation of new species, a process known as allopatric speciation. When populations are separated by barriers like mountains, rivers, or oceans, they evolve independently. The Darwin's finches of the Galapagos Islands are a classic example, where different islands led to the evolution of distinct beak types and feeding strategies. Lastly, we have the extinctions and climate change. Mass extinction events such as the one that wiped out the dinosaur 66 million years ago dramatically reshaped species distributions. More recent extinctions due to climate change, habitat loss, and human activity also affect where species exist today. Now here are the importance of understanding the historical context of species distribution. First, reconstruct the Earth's biogeographic history. Reconstructing Earth's biogeographic history means looking into the past to understand how species have spread and evolved across the planet. Scientists use evidence like fossils, ancient climate records, and the movement of tectonic plates to figure out how continents and species have changed over time. For example, when the supercontinent Pangaea broke apart millions of years ago, species that were once together got separated and evolved differently on different continents. This explains why some animals in South America and Africa are related even though those continents are far apart today. Number 2, it predicts how current species may respond to climate change. As the climate continues to warm due to human activities, species around the world are being forced to adapt. Some may move to cooler areas such as higher elevations or closer to the poles, while others may change their behavior or life cycles. Unfortunately, many species might not be able to adapt fast enough, especially those with limited ranges or specialized needs, and could face extinction. For instance, polar bears are struggling as the ice they rely on for hunting melts, while some butterflies and birds are already shifting their habitats due to rising temperatures. Number 3, identify regions with high conservation value. Scientists identify certain areas as having high conservation value because they are rich in biodiversity and home to many unique or endangered species. These places are called biodiversity hotspots, and they are often under threat from human activities like deforestation, population, and climate change. Protecting this region is extremely important because losing them could mean the extinction of species found nowhere else. Examples of such areas include the Amazon rainforest, Madagascar, and the Philippines, all of which have many endemic species that rely on those ecosystems to survive. And lastly, it explains patterns of biodiversity, endemism, and extinction. Biodiversity refers to the variety of life in a specific area, while endemism describes species that are found only in one location and nowhere else in the world. Extinction happens when a species completely disappears. Typically, regions near the equator, like tropical rainforests, have the highest level of biodiversity due to their stable climates and rich resources. Islands and isolated environments often have endemism because species evolved there without outside influence, but this also makes them more vulnerable to extinction. Understanding these patterns helps scientists prioritize which areas and species need the most protection. By studying all these factors together, we gain a clearer picture of how life has changed over time, how it is changing now, and what we need to do to protect it in the future.
The geographic distribution of species is not random. It is the product of Earth's dynamic history, from the shifting of continents to the rise and fall of ice sheets to the paths taken by migrating organisms. History has left a deep imprint on the biosphere. By studying these historical processes, we gain valuable insights into the complexity of life on Earth and the factors that shape and continue to shape its diversity. I am Jamaica A. Totowa, leaving you the code. The patterns we see in nature are the footprints of history. Thank you.
Good day everyone! Today I will be discussing an important concept in geographic range limits in ecology and evolution. As we explore the distribution of the species across the planet, we come to realize that not all organisms can be found everywhere, and their habitats are often confined to specific regions. This limitation is a product of various ecological and evolutionary factors which work together to define where a species can thrive. First, we will define geographic range limits. Geographic range limits refer to the boundaries or edges of species distribution. These boundaries are influenced by a combination of environmental conditions, biological interactions, and evolutionary processes that have shaped a species over time. From the effects of climate to the competition between species, these factors play a crucial role in determining where organisms can survive, reproduce, and adapt to their surroundings. So, let's dive deeper into this fascinating topic and explore how the limits of where species can live reflect both their ecological needs and evolutionary history. There are two ecological factors, the abiotic and biotic. But first, we will explore what is abiotic. Abiotic factors such as temperature, water availability, soil composition, sunlight, and atmospheric conditions play a vital role in defining the geographic range of a species. These factors set the boundaries for where organisms can survive and reproduce, influencing their ability to adapt and evolve. For example, species with specific temperature requirements may only be able to live within certain latitudes or altitudes, while those dependent on specific soil types might be restricted to particular region. The first type of abiotic ecological factors is temperature. Temperature extremes refer to conditions where the environmental temperatures are either too high or too low for a species' survival, growth, or reproduction. Both extreme cold and extreme heat can physically stress organisms, limit their metabolic processes, or even cause death.
As you can see in the picture, this is the example of extreme heat. This is a saguaro cactus. In places like the Sonoran Desert, it gets insanely hot. Temperature can reach over 45 degrees Celsius. Not many plants can survive that kind of heat, but the saguaro cactus can. It has a thick, waxy skin that helps it keep water inside, and it has shallow roots that spread out wide to catch every drop of rain. But here's the catch. While it's a champ in the desert, it wouldn't survive somewhere cold and rainy. It's just too specialized for heat. So, the extreme desert temperature actually limits where the cactus can live. This map shows the Sonoran Desert in brown and the range of saguaro cactus in the color green. The Sonoran Desert covers parts of California, Arizona, and Mexico, but saguaro cactus only grows in a smaller parts of the Sonoran Desert, mainly in southern Arizona and a small area in Mexico. You can see that the saguaro does not grow across the whole Sonoran Deserts, only where the conditions are just right, warm enough and not too high in elevation. In short, the Sonoran Desert is big, but the saguaro cactus lives only in special part of it. And also, this is the example of extreme cold. The Arctic animals are polar bears or Rhesus maritimus. In Arctic environments, temperatures can drop below negative 40 degrees Celsius. Polar bears have thick layers of fat and fur for insulation, and they rely on sea ice for hunting seals. Polar bears cannot survive in warmer climates because they would overheat and lose access to their primary hunting grounds as ice melts. Temperature extremes set hard boundaries on species' geographic ranges. Species adapt to specific temperature ranges, but beyond those limits, survival is not possible without major evolutionary changes. With climate change, species that are specialized for extreme cold, like polar bears, are facing shrinking habitats, while some heat-tolerant species may expand their ranges. Relationships between extreme temperature and geographic range limits limits. Extreme temperatures, whether too hot or too cold, set natural boundaries for where a species can survive and thrive. Every species has a certain temperature range where it can live comfortably. If the environment gets too extreme, the species either can't survive, can't reproduce, or can't compete well with others. That's why extreme temperatures are major ecological factors that limits where a species can be found geographically.
The next type of factors in abiotic factors is water availability. Water availability is a crucial abiotic factor that plays a significant role in defining the geographic range limits of species, both in ecology and evolution. In the context of these limits, water availability refers to the presence and accessibility of water resources in an environment which directly impacts the survival, growth, and reproduction of organisms.
For example, common frog or Rana temporaria. Amphibians like frogs depend heavily on water for survival. They need moist environments because their skin must stay wet to absorb oxygen. They also lay their eggs in waters, and their young or tadpoles live in water until they grow into adults. Frogs cannot survive in very dry or desert areas because they would dry out and die. Thus, their geographic range is limited to places where there's enough fresh water like ponds, streams, or wetlands. Right now, frogs are found mostly in areas where water is easy to access. If wetlands dry up because of droughts or human activities, frog populations shrink or disappear from those areas. Over long periods, some amphibians have developed thicker skins or behaviors to stay moist longer. However, rapid changes in water availability, like climate change or habitat destruction, may happen too fast for frogs to adapt, causing the range to shrink or forcing them to migrate. As you can see in the map, the green areas on the map show where the common frog lives, mostly across Europe and parts of Asia where there are many rivers, lakes, and wetlands. Notice that they do not live in places like deserts in North Africa or very dry regions because there is not enough water to support their life cycle. This shows clearly how water availability limits their geographic range.
The third type of abiotic factor is soil characteristics. Soil characteristics refer to the physical and chemical properties of soil like its texture, nutrient content, pH level, and drainage, or how fast pasture moves through it. These things affect what plants and directly and animals can grow and survive in a place.
For example, in soil characteristics, the purple pitcher plant. Pitcher plants live in acidic bogs where the soil is very poor in nutrients. They evolve trap insects and get nutrients from them instead of relying on the soil. These plants cannot grow in a regular rich garden soil. They are specialized for poor acidic soils. This map shows where the purple pitcher plant is naturally found, mainly across Canada, the northeastern United States, and around the Great Lakes region. They are only found in places with acidic, nutrient-poor soils like bogs and wetlands. Even if the climate might be okay somewhere else, without the right kind of soil, these plants simply can't survive.
Different species have specific needs. Some plants need rich and fertile soil. Others survive in poor, sandy, or rocky soil. Some need acidic soil, others need neutral or alkaline soils. Because of this, soil limits the geographic range of many species. Lastly, the light availability. Light availability is the amount of sunlight that reaches a specific location. It is a critical abiotic factor that determines where plants and animals can survive and reproduce. Light plays a vital role in photosynthesis, the process by which plants make their food. If a plant receives too much or too little light, it can affect its growth, survival, and reproduction. As a result, light availability helps determine the geographic range limits of various species. In other words, species will only be found in areas where the light conditions suit their needs.
The first example of light availability is sunflowers. Sunflowers are a classic example of a plant that requires full sunlight to grow successfully. These plants have evolved to be heliotropic, meaning they turn towards the sun to maximize light exposure throughout the day. This adaptation allows them to perform photosynthesis efficiently and grow tall, strong, and healthy. Sunflowers thrive in open sunny areas like fields and farmlands. These regions offer the direct sunlight that sunflowers need to produce enough energy. In areas with dense forests or heavy tree canopies, sunlight is blocked or any filtered through gaps in the leaves. Sunflowers unable to survive in shaded environments are not found in these areas. Over time, sunflowers have evolved to optimize their growth in open spaces where they receive full sunlight. This specialization allows them to grow taller and produce larger flowers and seeds. Sunflower seeds are typically cultivated in sun-rich environments like the Midwestern United States and parts of Europe where they are not competing for light with taller trees or dense vegetation. Second example of light availability is ferns. Ferns, in contrast to sunflowers, some plants like ferns have evolved to thrive in low-light environments. Ferns typically grow in shaded areas where the sunlight is filtered through the dense canopies of trees, as seen in tropical rainforests or the understory of temperate forests. Ferns are commonly found in shaded regions such as rainforests, woodlands, and forest floors, where they receive only indirect or dappled sunlight. These areas provide the low-light conditions that ferns needs. While sun-loving plants like sunflowers require direct sunlight for optimal photosynthesis, ferns have adapted to low-light conditions. They are able to grow and thrive with limited sunlight and can tolerate environments where the other plants cannot survive. Over time, ferns have adapted to take advantage of these shaded, low-light habitats. They are able to absorb nutrients and photosynthesize effectively in these areas, allowing them to survive and reproduce in environments that would be too dark for many other plant species.
And now, we will talk about the biotic factors. Biotic factors are the living components of an ecosystem that affect the survival and distribution of organisms. This includes interactions among plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, and any other living organisms. Biotic factors play a crucial role in reshaping ecosystems by influencing growth, reproduction, behavior, and population dynamics. Their relationships, such as predation, competition, mutualism, and parasitism, drive natural selection and contribute to the evolutionary adaptations of species over time. The first type of biotic factors is competition. Competition plays a major role in determining where a species can live. This is especially clear in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California, where two species of chipmunks, the yellow pine chipmunk and the lodgepole chipmunk, live at the different elevations.
The example in competition is the yellow pine chipmunk. The yellow pine chipmunk is typically found in lower elevations, while the lodgepole chipmunk prefers higher elevations. But in the middle elevation zone, their habitats overlap, and this is where competition happens. Both species compete for similar resources like food and nesting sites. In this overlap zone, one species often outcompetes the other, preventing it from expanding its range further. For example, the yellow pine chipmunk doesn't move higher up the mountain not because of the climate or terrain, but because it's uncompeted by the lodgepole chipmunk. This example shows how biotic factors like interspecies competition can limit the geographic range of organisms even if the environment seems suitable. This map shows the geographic distribution of two chipmunk species in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. The yellow area represents the range of the yellow pine chipmunk, which prefers lower elevations with the warmer temperatures and denser forest. The orange area represents the lodgepole chipmunk, which is adapted to higher elevations where it is cooler and less vegetated. The purple zone in the middle marks the overlap area where both species are present. This is where competition occurs. Both chipmunks compete for food and shelter.
Next is predation. Predation can restrict where a species can survive and reproduce. If predators are especially abundant or efficient in a certain area, prey species may be unable to persist there even if the environment seems otherwise suitable. This means the presence of predators can form a biological barrier to range expansion.
Example in predation, the snowshoe hare and lynx. In North America, the snowshoe hare is a key prey species in boreal forest. The Canada lynx, one of its main predators, restricts where the hare can thrive. At the southern edge of the snowshoe hare's range, the higher predation pressure and less escape cover due to habitat differences limit hare populations, preventing them from expanding further south. So, even if the southern areas have appropriate climate and food, intense predation pressure can stop hares from expanding their geographic range. This map shows the geographic ranges of the snowshoe hare and its main predator, the Canada lynx, across North America. The green area represents the range of the snowshoe hare, mostly found in the boreal forest of Canada and parts of the northern United States. The orange area represents the Canada lynx range, which overlaps heavily with the hare's range. At the southern edge of the snowshoe hare's range, populations decline sharply. This is not only due to changes in climate or habitat, but also due to increased predation pressure. In these southern areas, there is often less snow cover and less dense vegetation, making it easier for predators like the lynx to catch hares. As a result, predation limits how far south the snowshoe hare can live, acting as a natural barrier to range inspection. This example shows how biotic factors, in this case predation, can set geographic range boundaries just like competition can.
Parasitism and disease. Parasitism is a relationship where one organism or the parasite lives on or inside other organisms or the host, gaining resources at the host's expense. Disease caused by pathogens, viruses, fungi, and bacteria can spread rapidly and weaken or kill populations. High levels of parasitism or disease can prevent a species from surviving or reproducing effectively, limiting ability to expand into a new areas.
Is the Plasmodium parasite or malaria. Plasmodium, a protozoan parasite, and its vector, the Anopheles mosquito. Plasmodium causes malaria in humans. The Anopheles mosquito carries the parasite and transmits it to humans through its bite. The parasite invades human red blood cells, causing severe symptoms like fever, chills, and sometimes death. This parasitic disease spreads rapidly in areas with favorable conditions for both the mosquito vector and the parasite, typically in tropical and subtropical region. The parasite or Plasmodium benefits from the host blood to complete its life cycle while harming the host or the human. The disease or malaria, the parasite causes disease symptoms and if untreated can be fatal, dramatically affecting human populations in the areas where it is prevalent.
Mutualism. Mutualism is a biological interaction where two species benefit from each other. Some species depend so heavily on mutualistic partners such as pollinators, seed dispersers, or protective partners that they cannot survive or reproduce without them. If the mutualistic partner is absent beyond a certain boundary, it limits the spread and establishment of the dependent species.
Interaction between a bee and a flowering plant, a relationship where both species benefit. The bee collects nectar and pollen as food, while the flower relies on the bee to transfer its pollen to other flowers, enabling sexual reproduction. This mutualism is a significant biotic factor influencing the geographic ranges of both organisms. A plant species that depends on a specific pollinator can only survive and reproduce in areas where that pollinator is present. Likewise, bees require access to suitable flowering plants to sustain their populations. If one partner in this mutualism is absent from a region, the other may not establish or persist there, even if abiotic conditions like climate and soil are ideal. Over evolutionary timescales, such interdependence leads to coevolution where traits in each species adapt in response to other. Example, flower shape match the body structure of the pollinator. Therefore, mutualistic relationships not only affect species survival and reproduction but also play a critical role in determining their distribution and the evolutionary shaping of ecological communities.
Lastly, the symbiosis. Symbiotic relationships where two species live in close proximity and interact can influence where species thrive.
Symbiosis example: the mutualistic relationship between corals and zooxanthellae algae plays a critical role in determining where coral reefs can thrive. Coral reefs are typically found in tropical and subtropical regions where the environmental conditions such as temperature and light are ideal for the photosynthetic process of zooxanthellae. These algae provide essential nutrients of the corals, allowing them to grow and reproduce in nutrient-poor waters. In return, corals offer a protected environment for the algae. The success of these symbiotic relationships set a geographical boundary for coral reefs, as the delicate balance between coral and algae is highly sensitive to environmental changes. Factors like ocean temperature fluctuations, light availability, and water quality directly influence the survival of this mutualism. When corals experience stress due to warming oceans or pollution, they may expel their zooxanthellae, leading to coral bleaching. This disrupts the ecosystems and can limit the geographic range of coral reefs, particularly as rising sea temperatures push corals beyond their thermal tolerance. Thus, the coral's dependency on zooxanthellae not only dictates their ability to persist in specific regions, but also defines the geographical limits of coral reefs ecosystems in the face of changing environmental conditions.
So today we will be discussing the very important concept in ecology and biogeography, the geographic patterns of diversity. So first, we will define what is geographic patterns of diversity. So when we say geographic patterns of diversity, we are talking about how different types of life at the genes, at the species, and ecosystems are distributed unevenly across the earth. Some areas have very high biodiversity, while others have much less. So understanding these patterns is crucial because it helps us explain how life evolved, how species survive in different environments, and most importantly, how we can conserve them. So throughout on this presentation, we will be exploring the major types of patterns, the examples, and why we are studying them, and a matter for science and conservation. Now, why it is important to study geographic patterns of diversity? So there are 4 reasons why we needed to study the diversity and patterns in terms of geography. So first, to understand evolutionary processes, by studying where species live and how they are distributed, we'll learn how new species arise. That's called speciation. And how some species disappear is extinction. It's like tracing the family history of life on Earth. So second, to identify regions critical for biodiversity conservation, since we have limited resources for conservation, we need to know where to focus our efforts. By studying biodiversity patterns, we can find the hotspots where protecting just one area can save thousands of species. And third, to predict the impacts of environmental change. If we know how species are currently distributed, we can better predict how they might respond to changes like climate change, deforestation, or pollution. And also, this helps us to take early action to protect vulnerable ecosystems. And lastly, to analyze global biodiversity trends across different ecosystems. So studying these patterns, let us compare different parts of the world like forests, oceans, mountains, and deserts to understand where biodiversity is increasing, where it's declining, and where should we act urgently. So all of these reasons make geographic patterns of diversity a vital subject for research and action. Before discussing the different types of geographic patterns of biodiversity, let's first define what is species richness. So species richness is simply the number of different species in a specific area, and its major contribution in studying geographic patterns of diversity is that it provides the fundamental metric for, first, in quantifying how biodiversity varies across locations, and also it identifies the area with high and low concentration of species, and also it maps the globe, or mapping global and regional patterns of biodiversity, and also it serves as a baseline for understanding the factors that influence these patterns, such as, for example, the climate and habitat. So at this section, we will be exploring the 6 major types of geographic patterns of diversity, and each one helps explain why biodiversity looks the way it does in different parts of the world. And these are, first, the latitudinal diversity gradient, or the LDG, and the second is elevational diversity gradient, the island biogeography, the biodiversity hotspots, and we'll be also exploring the endemism patterns and the Rappaport's rule. And now for the first type and most famous pattern of diversity is the latitudinal diversity gradient, or known as LDG. So this pattern shows that biodiversity increases as we move from the poles toward the equator. If you noticed in our figure, the red line signifies that in this region there is a higher of diversity, because this region is the equator. And for example, let's say the Amazon rainforest, which is located near the equator, is home to thousands of species, while the Arctic tundra has far fewer. So what are the reasons behind the high diversity of species in the Amazon rainforest? So first is that it is because the location where the Amazon is located near the equator, and also the tropics receive more solar energy and have stable climates, which allow species to survive, to reproduce, and to evolve over long periods. And also this leads to greater speciation and less extinction. And according to study of G.G. Simpson in 1964, mammals in the Americas are more diverse near the equator. And later, Hillebrand in 2004 reviewed many studies and confirmed this pattern across birds, insects, and marine organisms, and more. And also, with this pattern, it reminds us that tropical regions are biodiversity treasure chests, and they need our protection now more than ever. So the second pattern of diversity is the elevational diversity gradient, which is biodiversity often peaks at mid-elevations on the mountains. So for instance, knowing that the highest mountain are located here in Mindanao, the Mount Apo. So when we climb Mount Apo in the Philippines, you might notice that the variety of birds and plants is highest halfway up and not at the base or not on the top of the mountain. And what are the reasons behind this? So mid-elevations have moderate temperatures and high habitat diversity. And also, species from both low and high elevations can coexist. And according to the study of Rabeck in 1995, this globally and found a consistent mid-elevation peak in the species richness. So with this, mountains are natural laboratories, and understanding their biodiversity help us in planning conservation strategies, especially as climate changes shift species upslope. So the third type of pattern is the island biogeography. So this concept shows how species richness on islands is affected by island size and distance from the mainland. So for example, the Galapagos Islands are home to many unique species like Darwin's finches, which evolved through and due to isolation. So what are the reasons behind of this? So large, nearby islands get more species from the mainland and have fewer extinctions due to more resources, and small, distant islands receive fewer immigrants and have higher extinction rates, but they often have the unique species that evolve in isolation. And according to the study of MacArthur and Wilson in 1967, it created the equilibrium theory of island biogeography that explains this balance between immigration and extinction. And also, if you notice in the figure, so the central idea on this figure is that the number of different species or the species richness you find on the island is not just random. It's heavily influenced by two key factors. These two factors are the island size and the island isolation. So the island size or the larger islands tend to support more species than smaller islands. And think of this way, bigger islands often offer more diverse habitats, more resources, and larger populations, making it easier for different species to establish and survive. While in island isolation, or the distance from the mainland, is that the islands that are closer to the mainland or the land masses generally have the more species than those that are far away. It is because it's easier for organisms to migrate or disperse to closer islands. So the mainland mass, if you notice, the mainland has a relatively high number of both types of species, as represented by blue triangles and yellow pentagons. So this acts as the source of pull for potential island colonizers. While islands A, B, and C, this represents the island at increasing distances from the mainland and generally decreasing in size. So the migration arrows, solid arrows indicates a frequent migration, likely between the mainland and the closest island, which is the island A, and between the closer islands themselves. So the dotted arrows represent infrequent migration, as you'd expect to more distant islands like the island C. So the species distribution is that the island A, being the largest and closest, has a relatively high number of species, though likely fewer than the mainland. While the island B, smaller and further than island A, has even fewer species, while island C, the smallest and most distant, has even the fewest species. So decrease in community richness. So the arrow at the bottom explicitly shows that as you move toward a smaller and more distant island, the overall number of species or the community richness tends to decrease. The text at the top reinforces that species richness on islands depends on the island size and isolation. So smaller, distant islands have fewer species, but often more unique species or endemics. And also, about the endemic species, it is also important because while the distant, smaller islands might have fewer species overall, the species that do manage to colonize them are often isolated for long periods. This isolation can also lead to evolving into unique species found nowhere else in the world. These are called the endemics or endemic to that area. And for the fourth pattern is the biodiversity hotspot. So these are the regions with high endemism, meaning many species are found nowhere else but are also highly threatened. So for example, in the figure, you can notice that there are areas having red color. So this represents the biodiversity hotspot areas in our map. And also, including the Philippines, is also a biodiversity hotspot. So for example, the Philippines, the Indo-Burma, the Madagascar are hotspots with thousands of endemic species, but also serve habitat loss due to deforestation and mining, and overall it is caused by human activities. And what are the reasons of having these biodiversity hotspots? So these areas had long-term climate stability, complex geography, and isolation, all of which encourage speciation. But however, rapid human expansion now threatens these regions. And according to the study of Meyers et al. In the year 2000, defined biodiversity hotspots as places with at least 1,500 endemic plant species and at the same time 70% habitat lost. So these hotspots make up just 2.3% of Earth's land and yet hold over 50% of terrestrial species, and also protecting these areas is one of the smartest conservation moves we can make. I know that this was already discussed previously, but for your knowledge, another type of diversity pattern is the endemism patterns. So endemism patterns is when species are found only in a specific and limited area. So for examples, the lemurs are only found in Madagascar, and the Hawaiian honey creepers evolved into many unique species on the islands of Hawaii. So what are the reasons behind this endemism? So the isolation restricts gene flow, which allowing the species to evolve in different directions, and over time they become so specialized they exist nowhere else. And according to the study of Lerner et al. In the year 2011, he studied the phylogeny of the Hawaiian honey creepers and found that all of them evolved from a single ancestor. With this, it signifies and a proof of adaptive radiation. And also, through endemism, it highlights how isolation and evolution go hand in hand, but it also means these species are especially vulnerable to extinction, and they can be found or saved anywhere else. And finally, for the last type of geographic diversity pattern is the Rapoport's rule. So this pattern shows that species at higher latitudes or closer to poles tend to have larger geographic ranges, while tropical species have smaller and more restricted ranges. For example, the Arctic foxes can live across huge areas, while the tropical frogs or birds may live only in a small rainforest patch. So, what are the reasons behind the Rapoport's rule? According to the study of Steve in the year 1989, a species in temperate regions must survive varying seasons and conditions, so they evolve broader environmental tolerances. And tropical species, in contrast, evolve in stable conditions and become highly specialized, but then less widespread. With this rule, it teaches us that tropical species might be more at risk under climate change. They're less able to move or adapt when environments shifts. Now that we have already discussed the different types and patterns of geography, let's take a look also into why these patterns exist in the first place. So first is the climate and energy availability. In the regions with warm temperatures, consistent rainfall and abundant sunlight, like these tropics, tend to have much higher biodiversity. And the reasons is because energy from the sun drives plant growth, and plants to form the base of almost every food chain. And more energy means more food, and more niches and more interactions between species. This also explains why tropical regions support many more species than colder regions or colder areas. These stable, energy-rich environments allow species to survive year-round and evolve over long periods. This is evident in the study of Hawkins and colleagues in the year 2003, whereas the areas with high net primary productivity or plant growth are strongly associated with high species richness. And next is the habitat heterogeneity, which simply means the variety of physical environments in an area. A diverse landscape with forests, rivers, hills, and open spaces offers more types of habitats. This variety allows more species to find suitable places to live and reduces competition between them. For example, tropical mountains often have forests, grasslands, and cloud zones, all within few kilometers. That kind of habitat diversity supports high biodiversity. And in the study of Steen et al. In the year 2014, environmental heterogeneity was shown to be one of the strongest predictors of regional biodiversity across the world. And the third factor is the evolutionary history, or specifically how long a region has remained stable over time. So species need time to evolve. In places like tropics, where conditions have been stable for millions of years, species have had more time to diversify and adapt. That's why older ecosystems like the Amazon and Congo rainforests have incredibly rich biodiversity. And on the other hand, regions that were covered by ice during the ice ages are younger in ecological terms. Many species there are still recolonizing or evolving. And in the study regarding the marine biodiversity by Jablonski et al. In the year 2006, it showed that species richness was higher in tropical zones, partly because they had more uninterrupted time for speciation. Let's talk about also the disturbances regimes, which refers to the natural events like storms, fires, or volcanic eruptions. So these disturbances might sound destructive, but in the right amount, they can actually increase biodiversity. The intermediate disturbances hypothesis that was introduced by Connell in 1978, it suggests that when disturbances happen at moderate levels, they prevent one or two dominant species from taking over, that allowing a greater variety of species to coexist. And for example, coral reefs and tropical forests often have small-scale disturbances like tree falls or reef breakage, which open up space for new species to grow and compete. And the last of these factors is the human impacts. And human impacts, unfortunately, this one is having a huge effect. So activities like deforestation, mining, urban development, pollution, and climate change are rapidly altering ecosystems. These actions destroy habitats, introduce invasive species, and increase extinction rates. So according to the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in 2005, biodiversity is declining at an unprecedented rate due to human actions, especially in places like biodiversity hotspots. Whereas in biodiversity hotspot, as discussed earlier, it nearly habitat loss of 70%. So it's a huge amount. And with that, but it's not all that bad news, because now we have the sustainable development goal, and also there are human efforts like creating protected areas, restoring habitats, and enforcing conservation laws that can help slow or reverse the biodiversity loss. So with this ends my report.